Hey guys, Lonewolf here. So I was having a conversation with Lucian a little while back about how your choice of loadout affects performance in Battlefield 4. So what impact picking a particular weapon or accessories has on your score, your KD, or your team outcome, so whether or not you win or lose. And his point was that his channel doesn't focus very much on picking the best weapon or accessories or even discussing it very much because it doesn't actually have that much impact on your performance. Now, my first reaction to this was, whilst yes, picking the best weapon does not make you the best player, at the same time, part of being a good player is learning to pick the right weapon and accessories for your particular playstyle or for that scenario. Either way, I thought it would be interesting to find out, so I've devised an experiment to try and determine exactly what your loadout does or doesn't affect. Now, the first thing I realized when trying to lay this out was that doing this in an even remotely scientific way just simply wasn't going to be possible. I don't have access to nearly the sample size I would need, and controlling all the variables in this game, it's just not going to be possible. So what I came up with is this. I would play half the game with an ideal weapon in an ideal loadout, or at least as far as I could determine, and then I would play the other half of the game with a less than ideal weapon with random attachments. Now, the gameplay you've been watching for the last minute is a warm-up round I played on Parasol Storm with the M416 and M9 as a sidearm. There were two reasons for this. The first was that I felt like I needed to warm up prior to starting this experiment, and the other was that I really didn't have all the attachments I needed for the M416 prior to starting. This may come as a bit of a surprise to those of you who've been using the M416 since day one and think that it's an excellent weapon, and I would have to agree. The M416 is a very good weapon, and it's extremely versatile. It may not do any one thing exceptionally well, but it does everything pretty well. This being said, it's not actually the weapon I would usually choose to play on Flood Zone, or even my preferred assault rifle. I usually gravitate towards the M16A4 and Scar H because I feel like they offer a better maximum potential, but with an increased level of difficulty. However, I have 22,000 and 14,000 kills with these weapons respectively, and so I felt it would be a little bit unfair on whatever weapon I pick next, so I chose the M416 because I feel like it's extremely rough and tumble. It's very easy to pick up and go. I chose the Coyote sight, the angled foregrip, and the suppressor to complement this weapon. The Coyote sight for its simplicity and ease of use, and the angled foregrip just to tame that 2.2 times recoil multiplier a little bit. The suppressor I picked, as I do with a lot of my assault rifle loadouts, because I feel like the benefit of keeping you off the minimap and reducing your audible footprint massively outweighs the penalty to hipfire and muzzle velocity. This isn't true for all weapon classes. I feel like for assault rifles it is, but for DMRs and sniper rifles it's really not the best option. However, with assault rifles, where your long range potential isn't really hurt very much, it does actually reduce the number of times you get shot in the back, and I'll note right now that from both my experiment and general play sessions, this is an attachment that I feel like is beneficial and will actually affect your performance. What you're going to hear from now on is mostly my anecdotal evidence of what it was like to play with these different weapons, and this particular game here, whilst I would say it was fun, with both weapons I used, I was actually shot from the rooftops quite a few times, which is something that you can't do a whole lot about with either gun, and it wasn't a lot of fun. Speaking of things that affected my quality of life, the Coyote red dot sight, I'm very glad there's a patch in the works for this, because as somebody who uses the US holo sight most of the time, I found that the dot in the middle was fairly obtrusive. However, as you can see, I didn't do too badly on the scoreboard, and whilst it was much lower than I would have liked, at the same time I felt my score was respectable enough finishing the first half. Moving on to the AK-12, this is another weapon I don't use very often, mostly because of its lower damage per second. If you and an enemy identify each other at long range, it's a lot easier for you with a close range weapon to close the gap and take them out than it is for you with a long range weapon forced into a close range engagement to extend that distance before you then have the advantage. This being said, the AK-12 is the starting assault rifle in Battlefield 4, and I distinctly remember feeling like once I unlocked better weapons, I would do better, and I did do better. So what I want to find out is whether in fact that was due to the weapon, or whether it was simply an illusion and I merely improved. Whilst what you're seeing at the moment are edited highlights, at the same time I do feel like this footage is fairly representative of what my game with the AK-12 was actually like. I did spend most of it in close quarters, and whilst the ACOG scope and low rate of fire might have made me feel quite uncomfortable in this situation, it actually wasn't hurting me too much. You know, seeing me here play B flag, I did play C flag for a little bit, though in a moment you'll see why I didn't spend too much time on there, and I also played over at A for a fair bit. And as much as I would have felt more comfortable with the M416's high rate of fire, suppressor, and Coyote red dot sight at the same time, I don't feel like this loadout's hurting me too much, and you'll see right here, this is the kind of thing I was mostly dying from. People sat on the roof, shooting down, and then in a moment throwing down some C4. This is, by the way, the reason I stayed off C point. At this point, the server decided to switch my team, which was rather annoying because I felt I was battling against the advantage I'd helped to gain for the other team. And what you're going to see right here is one of the few occasions in the entire game where I feel like using the M416 would have given me a better chance of success. I feel like perhaps with the higher rate of fire and the red dot sight, I would have had a better chance of tracking the target and dropping him before he killed me with the law. However, like I said, it's one of the few times in the entire game where this felt the case, and for the most part, I didn't feel like this loadout was holding me back too far. I haven't talked too much about attachments because I did just pick them at random and there wasn't much justification for any of them, other than the ACOG scope that I picked because new players are the only ones I ever seem to see running around with scoped fully automatic weapons, so it seemed like a good fit for the AK-12. I'm just burning the A flag here with Jester. We do manage to get control of it, but we are caught up trying to fight our way back to the middle of the map, so we aren't able to capture any more objectives after this one. We did lose the game, and whilst my personal performance did suffer a little bit in the second half, I felt like this was rather more because I ended up on the losing team than because I changed weapon. It is possible that my performance would improve for practicing with either of these guns, but at the same time I don't feel like the difference would be extreme, since there were very few occasions where I felt like either the weapon or my proficiency with it were actually letting me down. Mostly I was being killed by stuff that I simply couldn't have dealt with either gun, and the only way I would have actually done better is if I positioned myself better or thought about the game a little more before going in. I think people have got to be a little bit careful about taking their score as an indication of how good the weapon they've been using actually is. Moving on to some DMR gameplay here with the Scar HSV. This is definitely a candidate for best weapon in class. In a group of weapons that all do close quarters very poorly, I feel like you might as well pick a weapon that does long range the best. And the Scar HSV is extremely precise with very controllable recoil and has good muzzle velocity. You can see right here that whilst I'm still getting used to this weapon, my accuracy is actually pretty poor, but I'm going to get away with it because I put these wooden stacks between me and the enemy on my right, and I'm only engaging in one direction at once. Those people there probably don't even know where they're getting shot from. I'm now going to switch over to this side here and deal with these, and so with very limited team support, I've actually been able to defeat this push onto C. This is a perfect example of where good situational awareness and an ability to control your engagements has actually compensated for my poor aim and for the inherent flaws of DMRs. I've been able to pick up quite a lot of kills and completely stop their push onto C, quarantining them at A and B, and I'm only going to die here because I'm stupid enough to try and reach that next pillar while I know there's an enemy behind the rock. At this point, the enemy team, unless they use a helicopter to try and go to E, must break through either our line at C, which is now reinforced, or our line at D, which is probably supported by tanks on the main road. My team has now lost D and E, and while Jester tries to get back control of those points, I'm going to push up to B. Unfortunately, I had to go on top of the dish because there was a tank underneath, and that's made me very noticeable and an easy target for snipers. I did okay in that half, and now I'm going to switch over to the RFB. I've outfitted this gun in a way that I feel reflects a complete misunderstanding of where DMRs should be used. I know some people do enjoy the RDS on this weapon, but personally I feel like the ACOG scope is really the only way to go on a DMR. But you can see I'm still actually able to engage very comfortably at this range. I am missing more shots, but ultimately I'm not getting killed and I am getting kills. This one here, as much as I did miss that, and maybe I had a better chance with an ACOG scope, at the same time, while I'm suppressed and taking hits, I'm probably going to die anyway. And right here, this was not a fault of the weapon, that was my fault. I shouldn't have been out in the open, and if I'd done that with a Scar H, I would have had exactly the same result. You can see from this clip here that even without the ACOG scope, which I consider to be the most enhancing attachment for DMRs, and using a different weapon, I'm still able to get kills at very long range. Now that second kill there may have been attainable with an ACOG scope, but it really is very hard to say. Giving up my elevator position right here and moving into B point is really not something I'd want to do with any DMR, regardless of which one it is or which optic I'm using. This is much more of a close to medium range arena, and it's really not somewhere where DMRs shine. The only reason I'm doing this is because this position is strategically very important to us and my team isn't pushing up fast enough. This play right here is a good example of a scenario I came across a couple of times where I felt like if I was using an assault rifle, a carbine, or even a PDW, I would have been able to secure all those kills and survive. So when the difference between weapons is significant enough, like the difference between, say, a carbine and a DMR, then you may see a difference to your performance, but within a weapon class, certainly within DMRs, the difference in your performance is so minute that you're probably much better off working on your tactics than you are trying to decide what the best combination of weapon and attachments is. I actually followed this experimental format for several games, probably about 10, and I'm not going to show them all here because they all turned out very similarly to the last two, except for this one here on Dawnbreaker where I played as the aggressive recon. Playing as an aggressive recon with a bolt-action rifle is quite a difficult thing to do. It requires quite a lot of skill, quite a lot of practice, and to be completely honest, there are a lot of people out there who play as a sniper who really shouldn't be. They're not helping their team and they're not securing nearly enough kills for it to be impactful. I personally don't use the recon very often because I feel like the motion detecting abilities of their gadgets are made rather redundant by the commander UAV spam on most games, and unless you want to use the spawn beacon or the laser designators, the only reason to use the recon is for the bolt action rifles, and they present their own problems. Using a sniper rifle encourages you to play at longer distance. Even if you're playing aggressively, you still want to have the majority of your engagements at a medium to long range, and you want to be tackling one opponent at a time. As a result, you're going to find it very difficult to capture objectives where there is more than one person at once and where you can't line up a headshot at a distance where their weapon is less than effective. Even at medium range, unless you are much better than I am, you're going to find yourself doing what I am here, which is essentially struggling. And I just want to highlight this clip because it goes well with my point that in Battlefield you can get hit by threats that you couldn't have predicted and could do absolutely nothing to react to. That death there, along with about 3 others that are going to be shown on the scoreboard at the end, aren't really reflective of any fault on my part and certainly aren't a reflection on how good the weapon is. Switching over to the 338 Recon, this was a fairly unpleasant transition. The differences between these weapons may be subtle, but they actually make a pretty big difference to how you use them. The muzzle velocity of the Gold Magnum is higher, but more importantly, I know what it is and I'm familiar with how much I need to lead a target. Right there, I lined that shot up for much longer than I normally would because I was worried he was going to move. Just here, I'm going to take advantage of the hip fire of this weapon, which again, something you need to learn. You need to learn that this weapon is able to do that, and I wouldn't have even tried that with the Gold Magnum. I would have scoped in. You'll note that I don't actually have a whole lot of footage for this half of the game, and that's mostly because I'm pretty embarrassed by it. Using the 338 Recon, I really struggled. I missed a lot of shots that I never would with the Gold Magnum, and it mostly comes down to practice. With sniper rifles at least, you really need to learn your weapon. You need to practice with it, you need to be familiar with where it excels, its muzzle velocity, its rate of fire, and you need to play it appropriately. So for sniper rifles, choosing a different weapon does actually make a difference to your performance. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to get a screenshot of the scoreboard after the first half of the game, but I will say that I got about 25 kills and about 5 to 10 deaths with the Gold Magnum, so you can see that switching weapon, whether because one weapon is better than the other or just because of the change, did actually affect my score quite significantly. On the issue of optical attachments, if any of you have subscribed to Level Cap on YouTube, you'll probably know that he encourages people to pick one scope and stick with it. This is very good advice. For the first round I played on Dawnbreaker, I used the 8x scope on both sniper rifles. This is because it's my personal preference and I wanted to see if there was going to be any difference between the weapons themselves. For the next round, which I actually played immediately afterwards because of some server weirdness, I chose to use the 6x scope, and it made sniping even harder. You'll see right here that I shoot below, then above the target's head, and eventually I'm going to finish him off with a body shot. So from my perspective, sniper rifles and their optics join choosing suppressors and choosing weapon classes on my list of loadout decisions that will affect the performance of new to intermediately skilled players. Which leads on to the conclusion: how much do your tactical ability, gun skill, and the weapon you pick each affect performance? Luton is completely correct in his assertion that tactical ability is the most important. Ultimately, if you have good positioning and good game sense, you're gonna win the most games and even firefights, because an opponent with better gun skill is not going to be able to do much if you shoot them from behind or from the side or from, say, an elevated position. Good gun skill does have a place and it is going to affect performance, but it's something you learn naturally and something that some people are going to be naturally more gifted at than others. But also, I don't feel like it's nearly as important as tactics because, as I said before, good gun skill can be defeated quite easily with superior positioning. So I feel like the only people who really need to focus on improving their gun skill are players who already have good positioning, who are already advanced and want to improve further. I can draw a very similar conclusion when it comes to weapons. With the exception of sniper rifles, picking a suppressor, which is in itself a tactical decision, and deliberately uncomfortable loadouts such as a FAMAS with a heavy barrel and an ACOG scope, it really isn't going to make that much difference to your performance, so you'd be much better off trying to learn the maps or trying to improve your positioning and movement if you really want to improve. However, if you've already learnt good positioning and probably quite good gun skill by that point, then it may be worth focusing a little bit of time on your loadout. If your weapon and your accessories suits your playstyle, at that point you may find yourself able to pick up a few more kills than you would otherwise. All this being said, however, there's nothing wrong with lesser skilled or new players taking an interest in the weapons of the game and learning exactly how each of them work. I know I personally enjoy this, and there's nothing wrong with messing around with your loadout. I just want to caution against thinking that it's going to make a huge difference. Even at the highest level, it really doesn't. Anyway, thanks for watching if you made it this far. I'll leave a link to Lutin's channel down in the description if you do want some more advice on good tactics for Battlefield 4. I'll also leave a link to Levelcap's channel in case you're interested in the weapons of the game, which, judging by his subscriber count, plenty of people are. If this commentary goes over well, I'll probably do some more, so thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.